and welcome to Illuminations, which aims to showcase some of the healthcare and biotech industry's leading scientists, innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors. My name is Themasap Khan, and I'm the co-founder and partner at Luma Group. Today, we're excited to be joined by Dr. Allison Hulme, CEO, President, and board member of Aeovian Pharmaceuticals, the latest addition to the Luma Group family. Dr. Hulme brings more than 30 years of experience in drug development and commercialization, having held senior leadership roles at Sophos Bio, Elon Corporation, and Glaxo, before its eventual merger with SmithKline. Throughout her career, she has led programs from early development through global approval and commercialization. At Elon, Dr. Hulme helped drive the development and approval of Tysabri, a first-in-class multi-billion-dollar therapy for multiple sclerosis, MS, and Crohn's disease, and later oversaw late-stage Alzheimer's programs that resulted in $1.5 billion of strategic investment from Johnson & Johnson. Aeovian Pharmaceuticals is a clinical-stage company today developing a disease-altering treatment for one of the most common forms of genetic epilepsy, tuberous sclerosis complex, also known as TSC. Through proprietary insights into the mTOR pathway and a world-class team, Aeovian's made tremendous progress, and we're thrilled to support them as they dose their first TSC patients this year. Allison, thank you for joining us on Illuminations.
Thank you, Themasap, and it's been great getting to know you and the team at Luma Group. And thank you for having us and the opportunity to sit down today and explain and discuss some of the exciting opportunities that we have ahead of us with Aeovian Pharmaceuticals.
Allison, we love to start by letting the listeners hear about you and your personal journey, what you do, what drove you here, and what you're excited about today. And so I'd love to better understand what got you into the drug development world.
Absolutely. And first of all, let me say that I'm very fortunate that I have a job that I really don't consider work. I'm very passionate about science, working with people, and also establishing teams so that you have the ultimate goal of really making a difference in patients' lives. And that's really what has driven me throughout all of my career, if I'm honest. But it started very early on. I have a tremendous passion around science, and that started with me doing my 3 A-levels in the UK in biology, chemistry, and physics, and ultimately going on to do a PhD. And at the time, I knew I wanted to be able to make a difference. And at that stage, what I did was a applied PhD. It was all research, and I was sponsored by the Water Research Council in the UK to develop wholesale biosensors to detect herbicides in drinking water. And up until that point, the Water Research Council in the UK was using fish in fish tanks to pick up herbicides in drinking water. And really, they were very susceptible to thunderstorms, loud noises, and that would set off false alarms. So I got the opportunity to develop a wholesale biosensor tapping into blue-green algae photon electron transport chain, creating electrical current, and that would be inhibited by the herbicides in the drinking water. So that was my first application and really trying to make a difference. But I rapidly learned that I was really not going to be somebody that wanted to stay in the laboratory. I was probably a bit of a liability in the laboratory, and I really didn't get to talk to a lot of people and really feel that I could make an impact.
Allison, that just sounds like you were having a lot of fun doing science experiments, and you got to kind of learn the scientific methodology and perhaps where you wanted to go next. How did you get from biosensors and herbicides into wanting to go into therapeutics and drug development?
Yeah, it's a great question. So running in parallel in the laboratory when I was doing the wholesale biosensors were some colleagues working on enzymatic biosensors to detect glucose in blood for patients with diabetes. And that was something that really ignited in me a desire to be in a more impactful way impacting patient health and really trying to address some high unmet needs. And I realized I was not going to be in academia. I was not going to stay in the laboratory. So the natural next progression was to look to the pharmaceutical industry.
You know, I think that's an experience a lot of us have growing up as scientists. We sort of start, looking at insects in the backyard or looking into space and trying to better understand it. And it leads us to something that we might find more fulfilling. And in your instance, it was going into how can the things in science impact human health and disease. And so that brought you into quite an amazing storied career for at least 30 years so far and still building on it into the private biopharmaceutical world. And so tell me about like how you went from enzymes and glucose detection into thinking, I want to make a move into doing this at an organization that allows me to use a lot of my scientific understanding to impact what comes next. Like how, put me in the, Allison post PhD, or maybe thinking about postdocs and other opportunities on where you wanted to take your career next and what led you and helped you get there.
Well, it all started because I went into teaching, first of all.
Mm,
I had a job where I was teaching students of degrees and HNCs, which is a technical qualification in the UK. And I rapidly realized that some of those individuals on the HNC technical qualification were working for pharmaceutical industry. And getting to know them, getting to talk to them, really opened my eyes into the opportunities that I really would have if I went into large pharma. And coincidentally, at that same time, there was an advert in the New Scientist, which was a magazine I was a little bit of a geek, always enjoyed reading in the UK, for clinical research associates at Glaxo, a large UK pharmaceutical company. And that's where it all started over 30 years ago. I took my first job, and it was a tremendous opportunity to join Glaxo as a CRA, and really had the good fortune to work on a small molecule called sumatriptan, or Imitrex as it became known, which was a small molecule for migraine. And it was one of the first serotonin agonists to really treat migraine. So it was a wonderful opportunity to be exposed through large pharma to all aspects of drug development. It was at a time when large pharma took me from not only clinical development, manufacturing, commercial, and sales to really find throughout that journey, my sweet spot was actually in clinical development.
yeah.
And so I had a really good grounding to my first introduction to the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, and clearly you did not stay in large pharma forever because I think you probably learned a lot about how that organization works and maybe perhaps what you wanted to do next. So where did you go afterwards, and why not stay at this amazing organization that was building some phenomenal drugs for migraines and other neurological conditions?
Yeah, that was both a personal and a professional decision.
Mm,
Personally, we got the opportunity to move from the UK to the United States through my husband's
mm,
work, and it seemed like a great adventure at the time. And I think I lasted about 2 weeks being introduced as my husband's wife and not a career, before I saw opportunities here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was very, very fortunate. I really landed on my feet. I got an opportunity with a small company in the Bay Area called Athena Neurosciences, which was then rapidly acquired by Elan Pharmaceuticals, the large Irish drug company. And again, the opportunity that I had there and that I took up was working on the monoclonal antibody natalizumab, or Tysabri, which I had the good fortune to take from the IND all the way through successful phase 2 clinical trials in both multiple sclerosis and Crohn's disease, and then help establish the collaboration with Biogen IDEC as we moved into the phase 3 program. And that was a 50-50 collaboration with Biogen IDEC. And again, I was fortunate to work through that process, successful phase 3 programs in both multiple sclerosis as well as Crohn's disease, and then through to the commercialization of those products.
Even if you ended your story there, I think you'll have accomplished what so many of us dream of accomplishing. And sometimes it could take multiple lifetimes to get there. How much of this do you attribute to hard work and great teams and luck and just being at the right place at the right time? And I want you to give an honest answer here because a lot of our listeners and people we talk to, think about where do I go to find the most success? Where do I go to find the most impact with the work that I'm doing as a scientist?
I think there is always a little bit of luck. I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time there, but I also took advantage of all of those opportunities. I'm extremely passionate
Mm,
about being able to make a difference. And I truly, even at that early stage in my career, appreciated the benefit of a very cohesive team, all aligned to success and a very compelling goal of being able to help patients with a very high unmet need. So I think it's also the fact that I worked hard, had a strong work ethic, high resilience, because drug development, as we know, is never a straight line, and you all have to put the shoulder to the wheel and really help make a difference. As a result of that strong work ethic and my curiosity and passion, I was given multiple opportunities within the Elan organization. So not only did I have the opportunity with Tysabri and the great team that we were with Biogen IDEC, but I also looked after and ran the Alzheimer's program, as you mentioned earlier, which was another great learning opportunity, and was also asked to run the commercial organization for a short period of time at Elan Pharmaceuticals. So it really was an environment where I was given opportunities to continue my growth and learning and really harness that passion I have for drug development to really make an impact for patients and their families, ultimately.
Okay, so you're running this amazing franchise of Tysabri. You're given multiple opportunities to do other things. And then the Elon story comes to an end. And I think a very happy and a fulfilling end, perhaps. And so maybe you can tell us about what happens there and what parts of that story you were able to influence and control, and what were the outcomes of what led you, obviously, to where you are today.
So as Elan progressed, it became very apparent that Elan really didn't have any products in development, and that was really my sweet spot within the Elan organization at that time. And Elan broke up into its constituent parts. The research group going to Prothena, the manufacturing went to Alchemies, but there really was no development organization. So at that point, I moved with a colleague from Elan, Lars Ekman, down to San Diego, where I helped him bring a small public startup company off the Toronto Stock Exchange and put that onto the NASDAQ with an S1 for 65 million that gave us the money to run a successful phase 3 with an intraprostatic injection for men's health. So it was a very cognizant decision after having had the experience with Glaxo in large pharma, Elan and mid-sized biotech. I really wanted to continue my learnings by joining a small public startup company. And that was Sephiris, which gave me that tremendous opportunity and those learnings.
Yeah. So it seems like you've followed a lot of great opportunities because that's where your heart was going, and you never really back engineered, what you wanted, where you wanted to be, but rather back engineered what you wanted to be doing. And you took these opportunities as they came up. There must have been mentors and friends and family that were involved in some of these decisions. How did you grapple with that as you were globetrotting around the United States for these amazing opportunities?
You're absolutely right. I've had several mentors along the way, and one of them is Lars Ekman, who is now not only an ex-Elan colleague, but is now also on the board here at Aeovian. And Lars has been a tremendous mentor over several years, decades even. And yes, you need your family's support to do that. I have an incredibly supportive husband and daughter that realize that pharmaceutical development and making an impact for patients is incredibly important to me. And one small story is that my daughter was aged, I think, about 6 when I first started working on Tysabri, and always asked why mummy was never really around very much at certain times, and is incredibly proud now and will tell her friends of the story of how we got Tysabri onto the market, not once, but twice, and what an impact that really did make for patients living with multiple sclerosis. So they're incredibly proud and they've been incredibly supportive. I could not have done this, had the career that I'm having and enjoy the job that I'm doing without their support too.
So, Allison, that's when our journey begins together. And we've had the pleasure of getting to know you, your amazing team, over the last several months now, and being able to partner together. And it is also the first time you've stepped into a CEO role several years ago. And so perhaps it'd be great to start the story there and tell us What got you here running Aeovian Pharmaceuticals?
Yes, so I think it was a very natural progression from working with the small public startup, Sophiris Bio with Lars Ekman. And Lars was part of the Sophie Nova venture group, and he basically introduced me to Jim Healy. And during several conversations, the opportunity came up 6 years ago for me to transition as a first-time CEO and take up the role here at Aeovian Pharmaceuticals. I have to say it's been an extremely productive and fun 6 years, and thanks to our CSO, John Kincaid, we now have a library of selective mTORC1 inhibitors with our lead development candidate, known as AV078, now in the clinic for patients with refractory epilepsy associated with tuberous sclerosis complex. And that's a phenomenal move in the period of time that we've been together. So we're very excited about the prospect that we really can make a significant difference for patients that have this refractory epilepsy in tuberous sclerosis complex, where there's an incredibly high unmet need that needs to be serviced for them.
What have been your main lessons as a first-time
Yeah,
CEO?
okay.
There's many people in the industry, that transition from different roles as scientists or on strategy or business development into the CEO for the first seat. And we have the pleasure, obviously, of working with a lot of these individuals because often what we're investing here and at Luma is aimed to be best in class and first in class with luminaries in the fields, and they've been doing a lot of training before they get to the CEO seat. So, what's helped you along the way?
Yes, it's been a great transition from basically being the chief operating officer across a number of different companies. The breadth of experience that I've had from large pharma, mid-sized biotech, small public startup, and now a small private startup. And across those companies, I've had experience across both discovery, the research and development, approvals, commercialization. So I feel very well positioned now to take up this role as a CEO here at Aeovian.
Yeah, and you've obviously assembled a phenomenal team. How did you get all these folks together to work on this mission?
So we are a very small team, just 9 full-time employees. But what is very clear that we have decades of industry experience amongst the team across all aspects of drug development, whether that be discovery with our great Chief Scientific Officer, John Kincaid, whether that be in the research and development with Davis Ryman, our Chief Medical Officer. We just have depth of experience in many functional areas across the whole development process. And I would say that all of our team members have at least 20 years experience. And that is invaluable when you want to be nimble, smart, flexible, and really produce a very high performing team together. And with that high performing team, we also have a very extensive and trusted network of consultants. So although we're only a team of 9, we supplement that, if you like, or extend that with consultants that we've worked with, we know and are tried and trusted, and are equally passionate about what we're doing as we are. So they're an extension to our team, but we bring them on board as and when we need to have them. We don't need to bring them on board as a permanent headcount, which also helps to that flexibility and also keeps us very capital efficient, which I've learned is very important in my new role as a CEO. And we also know which CROs to work with. Those decades of industry experience means we know where to go to as a small company and still be a priority in that CRO, and that we have access to the high level professionals in that organization so that if we need to have something changed, we know where to go to get that changed. We get the attention that we deserve as a small company, and that's very important for us to be successful in the long run. So I think dedicated team, highly experienced, and really solid network of consultants, knowing which CROs to work with. We've got a dream team that's come together here to really be able to impact and make a difference for our patients with refractory epilepsy and tuberous sclerosis, as well as for Aeovian and where we may want to grow Aeovian in the future.
For the folks in the audience that don't live and breathe the mTOR pathway, which is uh, an important one we all learn in Biology 101 and many of us have probably forgotten about, tell us more about Aeovian's approach of going after this pathway, what it does, how you're the best at targeting it, and where does that get you?
AV078 is our lead clinical candidate that is a first-in-class selective inhibitor of just the mTOR complex 1, which is known as mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is responsible for, is a key fundamental regulator of cellular metabolism and growth. And we've precisely targeted the inhibition of the mTOR complex 1 to avoid the undesirable inhibition of the mTOR2 complex, which the first generation of rapalogs, rapamycin and everolimus, are non-selective and inhibit both the mTOR complex 1 and mTOR complex 2. And we believe that a lot of the undesirable side effects and tolerability challenges that exist with that first generation of rapamycin and everolimus come from the off-target inhibition of that mTOR complex 2. So what we're doing is precisely and deliberately inhibiting just the mTOR complex 1 to avoid those safety and tolerability challenges. And in doing so, what we believe that we'll be able to do is not only offer a safer and better tolerated treatment for patients, but also offer better efficacy too.
This is such an exciting story because as biologists, when we study these large pathways, one of the most challenging things is how do you drug them selectively? And often these complexes, as you mentioned, come together. mTOR1 comes together with mTOR2, forms a complex, and it has a lot of important functions it does downstream of the cell. And most people have been able to figure out how to just stop the whole thing, but what if you could just stop one part of the complex from coming together selectively? And then develop a drug to basically be able to get the more desirable effect you want versus the side effect. How did you come to that conclusion, and who was involved in making that decision, and why haven't other people figured that out?
There are plenty of people that have definitely tried to develop selective mTOR complex 1 inhibitors only and avoid that undesirable off-target inhibition of mTOR2. And it really has come about through a more thorough understanding of how those two complexes differ through X-ray crystallography, which has really been the last 10, 15 years. And then you have brilliant medicinal chemists, such as our own CSO, John Kincaid, who have been able to understand how you inhibit mTORC1 complex directly, and the inhibition of mTORC2 complex is actually indirect. And what we're doing is we're inhibiting the mTORC1 complex directly, and we're allowing the assembly of the mTORC2 complex to occur, something which the first generation, the non-selective inhibitors that do both, that inhibit both mTORC1 complex and mTORC2 complex are not able to do. And that is synthetically, we've engineered a certain part of that rapamycin scaffold to ensure that we inhibit mTOR complex 1, but we avoid the off-target inhibition of mTOR2 by allowing mTOR2 complex to fully assemble and function.
Well, everything we do probably has to have a purpose for patients. And although drugging biological pathways creates some pretty interesting papers, that's not the reason you set out to do this. You are focused on a certain patient population that suffer from a rare type of genetic disease called tuberous sclerosis. So I'd love to hear more about how drugging the mTOR pathway leads into helping TSC patients.
Yeah, so there's a wealth of indications that we could have explored with a selective mTORC1 inhibitor. And TSC, as you mentioned, tuberous sclerosis complex, is a rare genetic disease. And in this in patients with tuberous sclerosis, they have a genetic mutation in genes called TSC1 or TSC2, and they code for a protein complex that regulates the activity of the mTORC1 complex. And when there's a loss of function mutation, as is in the case of patients with tuberous sclerosis complex, the regulatory function governing the activity and signaling of the mTORC1 complex is disrupted. And what happens in patients with tuberous sclerosis complex, when that regulatory protein is missing, mTORC1 goes into hyperactive signaling. And that results in a number of manifestations for patients with tuberous sclerosis. By far the most common manifestation is epilepsy. Approximately 90% of patients with tuberous sclerosis will develop epilepsy. And of those, approximately 65% of them will go on to become refractory to your typical available anti-seizure medications. And so despite being on 2, 3 anti-seizure medications, some patients with tuberous sclerosis complex that are refractory to those medications can experience 9 seizures a week. And so there's an incredibly high unmet need to help patients with refractory epilepsy with TSC. And we believe that TSC is really a disease of hyperactive signaling of that mTORC1 complex. And we are ideally positioned with our precision approach to inhibiting that hyperactive signaling of mTORC1 and bringing that in line with that of a healthy individual to help reduce that seizure frequency for patients with tuberous sclerosis complex.
And that's no easy task because you're talking about the brain and you're talking about these tumors being expressed all over the body, but of course preferentially in the brain where it leads to epilepsy. And as we know, in drug development, getting things across the brain is not an easy task. How far have you gone in that journey?
We are the first company that has developed a CNS penetrant selective mTOR inhibitor that has now completed multiple dosing in the clinic. And so we're excited now that that puts us in a great position to go forwards into our phase 2 clinical trial, where we will be evaluating the potential of AV078 to not only provide a more safe and better tolerated therapy for patients with tuberous sclerosis complex, but also to offer them better efficacy too.
When we talk about TSC, we're often talking about the epilepsy and how these patients have seizures that are not addressed by other drugs out there, but they suffer from so much more than that, as you know. And so one of the things that was exciting for us at Luma is this may be the first disease-modifying treatments for these patients. What gets you excited about that aspect of this journey and drug?
You're absolutely correct, Themasap. We really do believe that having demonstrated that we can help patients with refractory epilepsy, we are treating the underlying biology of their disease, the hyperactive signaling of that mTORC1 complex. And as you mentioned, that results in other manifestations in addition to the epilepsy and the seizures we've just been talking about. Other manifestations are benign tumors in the brain, on the kidneys, in the lung, the skin. And we really believe that having demonstrated reduction in seizures and being able to help patients with their epilepsy, we really will be able to treat these other manifestations of tuberous sclerosis complex and really become that TSC drug of choice. Because we're treating the underlying biology, that hyperactive signaling of mTOR complex 1, we're not just a symptomatic treatment.
Something I've loved is you've always kept the patient in mind. You and your team are focused on that beachhead market of this amazing biology and chemical discoveries that we've had, and then being able to treat a certain patient population. So you've always thought about what would be the best in forming a group of investors that believe in that. And part of that has been engaging a group called the TSC Alliance. And it's one that we've gotten to know a little bit, but you've had a long-standing relationship with. So often our listeners, as they're putting together their financing rounds, are trying to figure out the best people to get involved. And I think we have the distinct pleasure of having this alliance involved. What has that meant for the company and the patient advocacy groups?
I think that's an incredibly important question, and it's something that we always take into account in drug development. and particularly with a rare genetic disorder like tuberous sclerosis. It's essential that we understand what it's like to be a patient with tuberous sclerosis complex if we're going to be in a position to really be able to help meet that unmet need. And I have to say that the TS Alliance in the United States is one of the best patient advocacy groups that in my whole 30 plus year career have had the privilege and opportunity to work with. They are incredible. They are very focused on their patients and advocating for them. We joined the preclinical consortium, and that gave us the tremendous opportunity to test a number of our development candidates in a mouse model of refractory epilepsy. And that model originated with Professor Wong at Washington University and was brought into a contract research organization, Psychogenics, with the help of the TS Alliance. And they really helped us test a number of compounds in that, what we call affectionately the GFAP mouse model of epilepsy, where we really showed that by selectively inhibiting just the mTORC1 complex, we were just as efficacious as the non-selective rapalogs, rapamycin, and everolimus. And that was really an incredibly valuable data set for us to be able to convince future investors like yourself that really by inhibiting just mTORC1 complex, we can be just as efficacious. You do not need to inhibit mTORC2 complex for efficacy. And as we've been saying, TSC is really a disease of hyperactive signaling of mTORC1 complex, and that really gave us some animal model evidence to support that hypothesis. And so that was the original start with the tuberous sclerosis TSC Alliance. They have also gone above and beyond that. They have established a network of patient advocacy groups. They've introduced us to those. So we're now in contact with patient advocacy groups in Australia, in the UK, and in Europe, thanks to their help. They've also helped us to make sure that our protocol that we're about to engage in our phase 2 clinical trial is practical from a patient and caregiver's perspective. They've also had patients and caregivers take a look at our protocol to just double check we're not expecting things that would be unduly burdensome for patients. And that's essential for us to collect and establish high quality data when we run our clinical trials at these sites with patients. And they continue to support us. As you know, they, through their endowment fund, have also contributed to the company's financing through this most recent Series B financing. And we're delighted to have them on board, and they will help us with the enrollment to make sure that our story and what we're doing is communicated to the patient community too, so that we can really optimize our protocol and our timelines.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so wonderful to have an organization, behind you doing all of that work on the ground and being able to represent patients and their caregivers into something that I would argue will increase the probability of a successful phase 2 clinical trial. Because often when we're enrolling patients in certain clinical trials for indications, you might not have that support from the other side, and things might not work out, not because the drug doesn't work, but just because the design did not make as much sense as it could have. And so shout out to the TSC Alliance and all the work they do with patients and working with Aeovian from really the early stages to help this thing become a very big success.
Absolutely. And we continue to work with them. As I say, they will be very key to helping us get the story out there about what we're doing. And I have to say, they're incredibly enthusiastic. We have, with our selective mTORC1 program, a very de-risked approach to treating TSC epilepsy. They understand that it is a disease of hyperactive signaling of mTORC1, and they understand that precedence has gone before us with the non-selective mTOR inhibitors. We haven't talked about this, but there are only 2 drugs currently approved to treat refractory epilepsy in tuberous sclerosis, and one of those is a non-selective mTORC inhibitor. everolimus, which inhibits both mTOR complex 1 and mTOR complex 2. But in doing that, it has a number of adverse effects and tolerability challenges with it. That safety profile, those adverse events, frequently cause patients to have to reduce the dose or actually have a dosing holiday from taking their everolimus, and that results in suboptimal efficacy. So we've got precedent ahead of us with both clinical and regulatory precedent there, but also patients, caregivers, and physicians out there understand that mechanistically this makes a whole lot of sense. That if we can just target precisely that mTORC1 complex and avoid that inhibition of the mTORC2 complex, which we believe and many do, drive those adverse effects and tolerability challenges, we're really going to be in a great position to offer something that is much safer, better tolerated, and in doing that, really enable better efficacy for their patients. So there's a great deal of excitement there, thanks to the TS Alliance, both the patients and the caregivers, but also with the physicians, which should really put us in a very good position as we launch our phase 2 protocol later this year.
Yeah, and just to translate that a bit more in layman's speak, it's the difference between patients being able to have a normal day or a not normal day based on the amount of seizures they have due to the actual primary cause of the TSC or secondary adverse side effects of a drug. So this truly has the potential, obviously in our humble opinion, to become a best-in-class drug.
We totally, wholeheartedly agree with you. Absolutely.
Allison, we've gone very deep into TSC and mTORC pathways and probably traumatized some of our audience with biology material again. But really, I think what we want to demonstrate at Illuminations is how deep you're able to go and then how you have to come back up and be able to lead a company. So what advice would you have for folks that would like to follow in your footsteps, Allison, and being able to become leaders at the companies that they're working at or want to go run?
I think first and foremost, I would really strongly advocate that they build a very broad foundation and very solid foundation. Take opportunities to really learn as much as possible, get some hands-on experience across the whole drug development process, if at all possible. It's not always possible, but try to do that. Don't be in a rush to run up the career ladder, chasing titles and positions. Really be confident that you appreciate and get as much experience on the drug development process. And I think you really have to be passionate about what you're doing in drug development. It's never a straight line from point A to point B. There's lots of challenges and curveballs along the way, and you really have to be passionate about really attaining that end goal of making a difference for patients and their families. So passionate, I think you have to be hardworking. You really have to have a good work ethic. This is not a 9-to-5 occupation. It really is something that becomes all-consuming. You need support to do that, but you really have to have that work ethic and commitment. And I think also attention to detail. Be very cognizant. We're dealing with patient safety, manufacturing. You really have to have attention to detail and precision around that. And you harness that together with multiple experiences across the drug development process, and you keep showing up with that and show that you're a team member. Lend a hand on anything, any opportunity you can get within the team to learn more and help out more. That will really put you in very good stead to be able to lead a team in drug development and the pharmaceutical industry. And it's one of the best jobs in the world, so I would highly advocate that you do that, but don't be in a rush. Really learn, take opportunities wherever you can to really establish that base.
That's very sound advice, and being able to run the organization at the scale that you have ran with 9 people is obviously tremendous to see how far this has gone. What's next for Aeovian?
Well, very excitingly, and we're incredibly proud and keen to get on with this, we're about to launch our phase 2 clinical trial with our lead candidate AV078 for those tuberous sclerosis patients with refractory epilepsy. And that is something that we've had in our sights and has been a goal for a long time since we started the company, and it's great that it's coming to fruition. And so we've got a lot of work to do. This is going to be a global phase 2 clinical trial. We'll be running in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, in the US, and in Australia. So that's going to take a lot of work and effort to make sure that we get the regulatory approvals so that we can run the clinical trial in those jurisdictions. And our goal is to get that up and running this year and to make sure we get good, high quality readout of data towards the second half of next year. And then we should be in a really good position to not only show the promise that we have to help patients with tuberous sclerosis and refractory epilepsy, but also the promise for Aeovian as well. This really should help us demonstrate the utility of that precision approach of selectively inhibiting just that mTORC1 complex. And really that can open up a wealth of opportunities in other indications for us here at Aeovian, whether that be in neurodegenerative diseases or metabolic diseases. There really is tremendous potential and opportunity. And all of that is really spurring on our team, small but very mighty, I have to say.
Well, Allison, thank you so much for letting us partner with you on this journey. The impact that you and your team have brought to these patients, hopefully in the future, I think is going to be tremendous. The improvements in the scientific understanding of mTORC1 and how important good science is to be able to do things that we hope it does is important to the scientific community as well. And so thank you for letting us partner with you.
Oh, thank you. We really are absolutely thrilled to have yourself and the team at Luma Group join us here at Aeovian. We consider you a critical part of the team as we go forwards on this journey and are just delighted to have you on board. And thank you for today's opportunity. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. For our listeners, stay tuned for more conversations on illuminations. And for those interested in learning more, we also encourage you to visit our website where we regularly publish content across a variety of topics.